Is it all just a bit of political theater by Trump loyalists, or, as some say, a coup attempt? Welcome to a special edition as we cover what up to now has always been a ceremonial formality, live pictures of the U.S. Congress's certification of the presidential winner, some Republicans vowing to contest Joe Biden's victory. That will trigger a recess of the joint session. Senators and congressmen will then go to their respective chambers to debate before reconvening. We do not know how long it will last, whether Vice President Mike Pence, who is also president of the Senate, will bend to pressure from Donald Trump and somehow try and intervene, and the effect of the outgoing president showing up at a Save America rally in the U.S. Capitol earlier, claiming once again that he won by a landslide and that he will never concede. Certainly didn't convince voters in Georgia, who in a Senate runoff look likely to unseat both Republican incumbents. So are we talking about a bit of bravado, or will there be lasting consequences for democracy in the world's most powerful nation? Joining us here in the studio, Randy Yallas, president of Republicans Overseas France. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us.
Happy New Year.
And Craig Capitas, contributing editor for Quartz. Happy New Year to you,
Happy New Year to you too, Francois.
From Berlin, American-born philosopher Susan Neiman. She's the author of Learning from the Germans, Race and the Memory of Evil. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Donald Trump speaking earlier. We'll hear more of that. But first, let's cross back to the floor of the House of Representatives, where you can see standing side by side, re-elected House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, and the President of the Senate, Republican Vice President Mike Pence, as the congressmen and women and senators. The senators, first it's the House members in, then it's the senators' turn to be welcomed into the chamber. There you see Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, who, if projections are correct, will become the Senate Minority Leader, what with the results of those two runoffs in Georgia. For now, if you're keeping score at home, one of those two Georgia senators, Kelly Loeffler, she has the right to vote in this proceeding because she was appointed by Donald Trump. The other outgoing senator from Georgia, David Perdue, cannot, as his mandate is over. And this is a new session of Congress that we're witnessing. And it's, again, Craig Capitas, political theater. Normally, the last time in 2017 to certify Donald Trump's election, this took 23 minutes.
Right. This is not political theater. Let's put that aside. This is an attempted administrative coup d'etat by Donald Trump, 140 Republican, I don't want to call them Republicans, 140 Trumpian representatives and 13 Trumpian senators. It has nothing to do with theater. It has everything to do with the attempted defenestration of the United States government as we know it, and an abrogation of the United States Constitution. Full stop.
But we've seen reports. The U.S. president himself, in private, says he knows he's lost.
That doesn't matter here, Francois. They're using this giant stage to send a message to some 70 million Americans who were bamboozled by this grifter through manipulation of the media, which you can read in Chris Wiley's wonderful book, Mind F-Word, which goes into all this in great detail. There is and most important of all is Trump is making hundreds of millions of dollars off of doing this by soliciting donations to his personal and campaign accounts off of this. So this is an attempted coup d'etat.
Randy Yallas?
I regretfully disagree with your guest. For us, I think this is a stand for electoral transparency for this electoral system. You are denying Americans the chance to listen to the different evidence that has been presented.
The courts have heard that evidence, right?
Let me finish, sir. Okay, you've given our guest a few minutes. We've gone through several state Senate inquiries and hearings, investigative inquiries, spending days with thousands of witnesses, experts, computer experts. There were even 2 different subpoenas that were issued by the Arizona Senate Judiciary Committee and by the Georgia Joint Bipartisan Committee, which required forensic auditing of ballots and machines. Every time they were refused by state and local officials. Why do we prevent America from seeing those things? We want to preserve. If we want to why I have the heavy heart.
But
to
hang
come
on,
here
it's
today.
Republican state officials in Georgia who
It doesn't matter. Whatever their reasons are, they're today.
So it's a plot.
It's not a plot. America needs to reconcile the situation. There are 70 million Americans which have questions regarding the issue of these elections.
We're gonna pick up on that, but we're gonna cross over to the floor of the House of Representatives and listen to the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi.
Floor of the House with that many people in here. And I thank the Senate and the Democrats by the rules. Let's go. Let's just start. Okay. Okay.
Madam Speaker and members of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting in joint session to verify the certificates and count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States. After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states. The tellers on the part of the 2 houses have taken their places at the clerk's desk. Without objection, the tellers will dispense with the reading of the formal portions of the certificates. After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama, which the parliamentarians advise me is the only certificate of vote from that state and purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors. Mr. Blunt. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Point of order, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Vice President. In order to follow with the Speaker's instructions that only a limited number of people be on the floor, may I ask how one would make an objection or make a parliamentary inquiry in the future if you're not on the floor but in the gallery?
Just under section 18, just read the first one.
Under Section 18 of Title III of the United States Code, debate is not permitted in the joint session.
You want to hand the teller?
Gentleman's recognized.
I'm not attempting to debate. I'm trying to find out how a parliamentary inquiry or a parliamentary point of order would be made in following with the Speaker's request that most of us not be on the floor. How do you make one of those points of order when you don't know what's going to happen later?
Respectfully, the gentleman's parliamentary inquiry constitutes debate, which is not permitted in the joint session under Section 18 of Title III United States Code. With that, Mr. Blunt.
All right, we seem to have lost the connection there with Washington. We'll try to reconnect now as they begin to the reading out of the electoral votes per state. And normally, again, this is a ceremonial process that we see, but what we are expecting is that when they get to some of the closer states, perhaps beginning with Georgia, that we will hear objections, and then both sides will return to each. Arizona before that, it says Randy Ellis, excuse me. So let's take a listen.
He should They think it's working, so we'll try again. Okay, order.
Mr. President,
Order in the chamber.
Mr. President,
Gentlemen will continue.
the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 9 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alabama that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none. This certificate from Alaska, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote from that state that purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of the state purporting to appoint and ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 3 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alaska that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
If not, there are none. This certificate.
Hearing none. This certificate from Arizona, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote that the state purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Arizona seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Joseph R. Biden Jr. of the state of Delaware received 11 votes for president, and Kamala D. Harris of the state of California received 11 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Arizona that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is. An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law, Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection. Next page, please.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given.
Are there further objections to the certificates from the state of Arizona? The chair hears none. The 2 houses will withdraw from joint session. Each house will deliberate separately on the pending objection and report its decision back to the joint session. The Senate will now retire to its chamber.
All right, there you have it. The first of what could be many objections in one of those key swing states, Arizona. We expect the likes of Georgia, perhaps Pennsylvania, Michigan to follow. We're talking about it in the special edition of the debate with Randy Yallows, Craig Kapitas, and Susan Neiman, who's with us from Berlin. Your reaction to what is unfolding in the chambers of Congress?
Well, I'll say several things. First of all, to the second person who spoke, whose name I didn't catch, the votes from Georgia, where I was born and grew up, have been counted and recounted 3 times. This is not theater. There have been very good analyses of what is going on today in Congress based on the fact that it's quite clear that these attempts will fail. But Mitch McConnell has already said so. So what is going on is a number of Republicans who intend to run for further office are attempting to appeal to Trump's voters by taking a stand with him that they know will be lost. But that way they secure the support of his voters. It's a very cynical move. And I must say to the first speaker, this is very definitely a coup. The only reason it's not a real coup is that Trump has insulted the military so often that he knows they will not back him. Perhaps you saw that all living secretaries of defense, including such people as Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, nobody I admire, wrote a joint letter to the Washington Post this weekend reminding the military basically that we have a civilian government and that the military cannot act against the Constitution. Otherwise, I believe they would have. Donald Trump did something really extraordinary in American politics that I thought would ruin him some time ago. He was asked to attend a ceremony in France honoring Americans who died in the First World War. And he asked why he should do that because, after all, they were suckers and losers. Donald Trump is actually incapable of understanding that anyone would act for reasons other than power and material gain. And so a soldier who risks his life to defend his country is someone who he literally described as a loser.
Susan Neiman, do you really think, Susan Neiman, do you really think that the military would have intervened?
Well, thankfully, because he insulted them so very many times, he also recently even vetoed a military appropriations bill, among other reasons because people wanted to rename some of the military bases in America, which are named for Confederate generals who, after all, were traitors to their country. This is a racist, position to want to maintain the names of Confederate generals. He just recently vetoed a military bill. Congress overrode his veto, I believe, for the first time in his regime. So, yes, I do believe that a military coup would have been possible. He has been sending signals to militia, the Proud Boys, various of his supporters
we're gonna talk
who
about
are
that.
armed and dangerous.
Susan Neiman, we're going to talk about that, but I want to first cross over to our correspondent, Ketevan Gorjestani, who is in Washington. Ketevan, one person who won't be defying the established order is the vice president himself, Mike Pence, before entering the chamber, saying that he was not going to, he does not have the power to discard the electoral votes. This after less than an hour earlier, Donald Trump again called on him to intervene at a rally near the White House.
Yes, Donald Trump really putting the pressure on his vice president all the way till the end, saying that he wanted Mike Pence to come through for us, and that if he didn't come through, he wouldn't like him as much. And so that pressure, he tried as much as he could, but Vice President Mike Pence did not give in to that pressure. He sent a letter to lawmakers a little bit earlier today in which he explained that he did not have the authority to reject those electoral college votes. He said that he didn't have the unilateral authority to determine which electoral votes should be counted and which should not. My role as presiding officer is largely ceremonial. He was basically telling lawmakers, if you want to object to some of those results, you have the right to do it. You then have to vote on it, but I cannot do that myself. And so at the end of the letter, he explains that he sat through with lawyers, congressional experts who told him that he simply did not have that authority. And so Vice President Mike Pence really putting the law in between him and Donald Trump and what Donald Trump was asking him to do.
And Ketevan, again, the scenes we're witnessing now are quite extraordinary. This is a process that could last hours if there are objections for all of the key swing states. This has never happened before in the United States.
Not on this scale, definitely. It has happened a few times. There have been a few objections in recent memory. There was that objection from Barbara Boxer, for example, to the state of Ohio, but it's really usually just one state. And the real difference from the past examples that we've had of any objections to electoral college results is that the last time these things happened, the candidate who had lost the election had already conceded. And so some of these objections were a little bit more on principle than to actually overturn the result, whereas that is not at all what is happening right now. Donald Trump, when he's putting pressure on lawmakers, on Republican lawmakers to object, is to try to overturn the result of these elections. What we're hearing, what we heard initially is that we could have objections on all 5 of the big contested states, of course, Arizona, as we saw, Pennsylvania, Georgia, as well as Michigan and Wisconsin. But now it seems that maybe it could be just the 3, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But every time there is an objection, we're going to see the House and the Senate split, go back to their chambers, debate that objection, and then having to vote. That process taking a couple of hours each time. So at least maybe 6 hours. So we're in for a long day and perhaps a long night.
It's been a long one for you, having just flown back from Atlanta, where you were covering those 2 Senate runoffs. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Randy Yalos, it seems binary at this point inside of the Republican Party. You're either with Donald Trump or you're with Mike Pence. Mike Pence, who put out a statement, I'll read it to you, saying, "It is my considered judgment that my oath to support and defend the Constitution constrains me from claiming unilateral authority to determine which electoral votes should be counted and which should not."
I think the question also was brought before Congress in 1877, and under the leadership of Senator Cruz, what they're suggesting and what they were asking Vice President Pence to do was to form a commission, a bipartisan commission with the High Justice of the Supreme Court to be involved, and to do an audit, an emergency audit over 10 days regarding the allegations of electoral fraud and irregularities in the 6 swing states. And that's what's been promoted by a large majority of these GOP senators and representatives. And I think that's where the key is. We want to have transparency. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or if it's Biden. For me, I come with a heavy heart because we know what's happened. They've gone, and I don't have to be here. Honestly, you've asked me to quit because I think it's important. And going forward, We know what the likely result will be, that it will be Biden who become president, that we've lost the majority in the Senate. The idea is also to reconcile America. And if we want to reconcile America, we also have to be transparent with 75 million other Americans to see what happens. Is look what happened. Let's do eventually a commission. Let's go over all these different allegations and let the different state legislatures review them if necessary. If there's no issue about it, then there won't be any issue about it. They could
But
suggest,
they've done that process. They've done that.
but this process
they've counted and
existed
recounted.
in 1877. We've heard several committees. The Homeland Security Committee before the Senate heard days of investigations, experts, witnesses. 6 different states have held equivalent hearings and investigation. So today,
So is
it's a
Mike
choice.
Pence wrong?
Mike Pence is making a choice, and he will have the responsibility of his choices. It's up to him. He is in his position. Only he can decide what's right or wrong in his position.
Craig Capitas, let's listen to, first of all, to what Donald Trump had to say a short while ago at that Save America rally in Washington, D.C.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
You don't concede, never give up. So what happens now?
Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States.
But Donald Trump's not going away, is he?
I don't think the media will let him go away because there's profit to be made in covering it. But may I go back to a point Susan made? She made a very good point, but she failed to put a spear tip on it about the military. The military would not ultimately have interceded, but I'm probably the only person on this studio right now who's actually ever covered the military. And I can guarantee you that when 10 former secretaries of defense, including Republican secretaries of defense, led by Dick Cheney, would write a letter warning the American public, that means there's something going on behind the scenes that those guys were very concerned about. It was not a question of military intervention, but that Trump's talking about this would question the chain of command, which would cause confusion within the military. That's the salient point there. And Susan, I think that's the spear tip of what you were trying to get at there. There would have been chaos, there would have been confusion. As for all this other nonsense we're hearing, I don't want to enter into a debate with counsel from the Republican state of denial. He is a lawyer. You have had close to 80 court decisions that have gone against you. You have had all the governors, all the secretaries of state from all states signed on to this as legitimate. These votes are legitimate. You had your day to adjudicate these in court in front of judges who were appointed by Donald Trump and other Republicans. And who did you bring up to argue these cases? A bunch of rummies. Amazing that they got even into law school. And if that is your defense, please go right ahead. But I don't think it's worth the time to go into an argument over the legality of this. The court decisions were made.
All right, Susan Neiman, very briefly, and then Randy. Go ahead.
I can't hear you.
First of all, thank you. You covered the military. I haven't. I've only known some good service people. But what's most important about the claim that we need more transparency, 350,000 Americans have died from a pandemic that has been botched by this administration and is still being botched during the transition. I think we have more important things to do right now than, as was just said, re-adjudicate an election that has just been adjudicated. adjudicated by Trump-appointed judges. And the second thing is I get quite nervous when people start referring to the 1877 election, which was perhaps the most disastrous compromise, certainly for African Americans in American history. We can go into that or not if we like, but essentially there was a deal made to solve that impasse by taking away all of the rights of African Americans that had just been won in the Civil War. So the 1877 election is nothing to be proud of.
Randy Yellows.
The question, you bring the context, you're doing the same type of thing. If you're denying half of America what you're saying that that time that it deprived African Americans of the rights that they gained after the Civil War, maybe you should think about also about the 70 million Americans. There was a Gallup poll in November that said 60% of the Republicans, which represent about 50 million Americans, still have a major concern regarding the alleged electoral fraud. And regarding the threats, the chaos, we have extremist leftist groups that threaten even Mr. Hawley and his wife at his house. They were threatening, they were knocking down his door. We had them before yesterday. So don't start
Run the videotape of that because that's a bald-faced lie.
No, excuse me, sir. Don't interrupt me.
Run the videotape of what happened at Hawley's house.
Sir, can you ask him, sir? Sir, please do not interrupt me.
Run the evidence.
Sir, because you know that's your specialty. Because to interrupt someone that's the way you don't let them speak and you have the narrative.
Show the evidence. Show me the tape. Show me the tape.
Silence for yourself, because you screaming, you think because you can over talk what you.
All right, one at a time. Randy Ellis.
At the same time, there's an issue because there's a concern regarding why there hasn't been disclosure made to the transition team for Biden by Acting Secretary of Defense Miller had to consolidate control of special forces between civilian and military special forces when he got into office. And that was an exceptional measure that was done by Acting Secretary of Defense. And he's decided since that, for a few weeks already, not to provide certain intelligence to the Biden team, and they have been complaining about it. So there may be specific concerns that we do not know of today that maybe have to deal with issues of national security. And we may find out, because there will be a report by Mr. Radcliffe in the next few days and next week or two that are supposed to be done.
All right, you mentioned the threat of far-left militias, but of course the last 24 hours in Washington, what we've seen is far-right militias that have been in the streets.
Have you, show me, has there been violence in the streets yet?
Well, there were arrests made. There was a confrontation between police and the Proud Boys that took place near the White House. There were incidents on Tuesday evening.
On Tuesday evening, that was a pure exception. At the same time, we don't know also because the other days we've also had the Antifas involved in the violence that has occurred, and so there will be. Let me explain things to you, because the other different times when the Antifas were involved, there was an extreme amount of violence, and they were very peaceful, all the other demonstrations. Today, you may have had a couple of incidents, but you're not going to say that the 700,000 million people in the streets will constitute violence. Excuse me. When we were doing, why didn't we send all the police into the streets when they were burning cities, rioting, and...
All right, we're getting off the topic here.
But that's the same thing. You're trying to blame the right-wing parties and right-wing protesters for violence when they burn the extreme left. Madam, you like to interrupt, and the other guests like to interrupt me when I speak. You've had a majority of the time. Why don't you let other people talk? Again, that's a question of transparency. Stop blocking people. That, unfortunately, that's why I won't come often to the media, because you just do not respect the other people's time when they talk.
Susan Neiman.
I am taking time this evening, in a very busy evening, in order to talk, and I would like to ask our Republican here if he has followed the attacks on the home of the Republican Secretary of State in my home state, Georgia, okay? The Republican Secretary of State, after 3 recounts, has defended the integrity of the election. For that, his home and his family have been threatened. Have you followed that?
I've followed the different things, and I've also followed different violence when there's several thousand. Have there been any arrests when we have double counts on electoral lists? Because there have been several established, even in Georgia, there were a couple thousand double voting under the Electoral Act, people voting twice. Have they been elected? The question is, there have been no prosecutions at the same time.
Where does this allegation come from?
No. There haven't been arrests. When there's been...
But where's the double voting? I don't see...
When there's double voting, there have been specific incidences that there have been double voters, people have voted twice, and there's no...
Let's talk about Georgia for a second. There, the Reverend Raphael Warnock defeating Kelly Loeffler overnight, who is still refusing to concede. Let's first listen to her.
We're going to make sure every vote is counted. That's right. Every legal vote will be counted, and I'm not going to stop working. In the morning, in fact, I'm going to be heading to Washington, D.C. to keep fighting. That's right. We're going to fight for this president.
Raphael Warnock, who, according to state officials, has an insurmountable lead. He's going to become only the 11th African-American elected to the U.S. Senate. He's the pastor at Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church, the same where Martin Luther King preached.
No matter who you cast your vote for in this election, in this moment in American history, Washington has a choice to make. In fact, all of us have a choice to make. Will we continue to divide, distract, and dishonor one another? Or will we love our neighbors as we love ourselves? Will we play political games while real people suffer? Or will we win righteous fights together, standing shoulder to shoulder, for the good of Georgia, for the good of our country?
Susan Neiman, again, there have been other African Americans in the past, including, of course, Barack Obama and Kamala Harris, who've been elected to the U.S. Senate. Why does this one in particular matter, though?
Well, first of all, he's the first one to be elected from Georgia ever. Secondly, he is the first black man to be elected to the Senate from the Deep South at all. The last time there was one, it was during Reconstruction, this very brief period before the election of 1877, which took away black people's right to vote, etc. What I find particularly moving, having grown up during the civil rights movement in Atlanta, worshiping in the temple that was bombed, the synagogue that was bombed because the rabbi was a big supporter of Martin Luther King's. Both Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff have referred to that history of solidarity between Jews and blacks working together for a new South. And they've campaigned together practically the whole way. So it's particularly moving if you think about globally. Sometimes there has been tension between Jews and people of color. What we see here is, first of all, a revival of that solidarity. But of course, what's even more important, and this will be important for the whole world, if Mitch McConnell no longer has control of the Senate, Joe Biden's administration will actually be able to pass legislation on climate change, on reasonable foreign policy, on the pandemic. Pandemic, you can do a lot with executive privilege, but he will be able to pass significant legislation. Mitch McConnell said in the first few months of euphoria all over the world after Barack Obama was elected that his only mission was to make Obama a one-term president. He failed at that, but because he controlled the Senate, he blocked virtually every initiative that President Obama tried to put through. Anybody who hasn't read his wonderful best-selling book should do so. It's terrific. So this is a really, really wonderful moment. I'm still checking the polls a couple of times an hour, but it very much looks like John Ossoff will win and Mitch McConnell will no longer be majority leader.
Justani, you're just back from Georgia. Before I ask you about that, and we're watching, by the way, live images of McConnell speaking on the Senate floor. If you're just joining us here on France 24, those in the House have gone to one side, those in the Senate to the other, as they go over the objections made to Arizona's electoral college vote count. Kedivan, you're saying there's breaking news out of Washington.
Yes, I'm getting some reporters who are on the ground who are posting these images of some clashes outside of the walls of Congress. Trump supporters who have breached. There have been several security barriers outside of Congress to try to prevent protesters from getting too close. Apparently, these Trump supporters, a small group of them, went through those barriers and have clashed with the federal police guarding the building of Congress. They were obviously trying to get into the building. These images from several different reporters there coming out about 20 minutes ago. So I don't know what the situation is right now, but there have been at least 15 or 20 minutes ago clashes with Trump supporters trying to get into the Capitol buildings. Some images a little bit reminiscent of what we saw in Michigan back a few months ago when some Trump supporters were angry at some of the mask mandates against the coronavirus and tried to get into the Capitol building there. The difference is that in Michigan, they were armed. Here, apparently right now, at least, no arms involved. Of course, in Washington, D.C., there is no concealed carry, and the mayor, Muriel Bowser, had put out several statements telling the people who were coming for those protests to remember that D.C. did not allow concealed carry.
Kedivan, you just heard Susan Neiman there. You're just back from Georgia, where those two Senate runoff elections look poised to tip the scales in favor of the Democrats in the upper chamber in Congress. What made the difference?
It seems that it was turnout that made the difference, and the Democrats knew that their only chance was to increase turnout from what they had seen in November and to try to boost as much as possible that turnout. Now, the turnout, at least from what we're seeing, is not going to be exactly on par with what took place in November, but usually when you see a Senate runoff, you see a huge drop in participation, and you haven't seen that this time around. And it seems that most of that increase in turnout has come from the Democrats. The Democrats knew that that was going to be the case, starting with early voting, because we quickly got information and data from the election officials who said even before Election Day that they had already surpassed about 3 million votes. That was just mail-in ballots and early voting. Those two, of course, we saw back in November, skewed heavily towards the Democrats. And then there was another indication that things were looking good for the Democrats, is that among this early voting and mail-in ballots, you saw an increase in turnout from African Americans compared to their share of the voters back in November. 3, 4, sometimes 5 points estimates, of course. And so the Democrats knew that a larger share of African Americans voting meant a larger share of votes for the Democrats. And it was interesting to hear Gabriel Sterling, the top election official in Georgia with the Office of the Secretary of State, earlier today giving a press conference and saying, he was asked a question about that turnout and why it skewed so heavily towards the Democrats. And he responded, while the Republicans were busy attacking me and my boss, meaning the Secretary of State of Georgia, while the Democrats, they were knocking on doors and getting people out to vote.
Yellows, your reaction to that?
Well, that's the situation. I think it's too early to say what the results are. What are the reasons for it? I think we're going to have to analyze things, because I've heard many, even African-American commentators, saying that they were expecting a high turnout, especially about men, African-American men, in favor of the Republicans. So it will require some time to analyze the results, to understand what has gone in favor and what has gone maybe for one party or for the other. And honestly, I think as we saw in the prior presidential election, there was a high increase in number of African Americans that supported Trump, and that was clearly established. And especially in Georgia and rural areas, and especially for Mr. Perdue. Mr. Perdue is well known for supporting rural African Americans because they had a disaster a number of years ago, and they supported him, and they're very grateful for what he's done, Mr. Perdue, at that time. So that will require a little bit of analysis, and the results are very, very close. We can't say it's very, very true. A major result. So the results are very close, and they require some analysis. And I don't think today it wouldn't be fair to either one side to say why.
All right, we're watching now. If you're looking at those live images, what could be soon the Senate Majority Leader, Charles Schumer of New York, speaking. Earlier, we were watching Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, the current Senate Majority Leader. He said, and I'll read it to you, Randy, if we overrule the voters, it will damage our republic forever. Is it time now to let bygone to move on?
Can I make a comment? Of course. I think, like I said, today I come with a heavy heart before the various people up here because, again, we will be in front. Like we said, Biden will probably come into office on the 20th. We've lost the majority in the Senate. Why are we here? I think if we're going to reconcile, and that's what we're hearing from all these Americans that have supported, 75 million Americans supported Trump. 50 million of them think there's a concern regarding alleged electoral fraud. We need to have a little bit of, why do I say transparency? It's because we want to reply. If we're going to reconcile, why not allow the auditing? Why not have a commission? And I can fully
But that's not what Mitch McConnell's saying. Mitch McConnell's saying, the voters have spoken, is what he's saying.
Mitch McConnell has his view, but I fully understand Mr. Ted Cruz's position and the 180 other representatives and senators.
Very understandable. Sure.
It's understandable.
Democracy.
No, sir.
Yeah.
Can I speak a little bit? I don't interrupt you when you speak. It's quite strange that when I have something to say, you always want to interrupt me. So I'll get back to it. So I'm not going to waste televised time for this. So again, it's important to understand that if we expect 1/3 of the GOP base to support Mr. Trump and request a commission, I think that's the answer to have transparency. And then I think we should move forward. Honestly, that's what I want for going forward. I want this country to reconcile and going forward, and for us to trust the results. Today, I think there's an issue because you were saying that we were rejected by the courts. 95% of the cases were rejected on procedural grounds for standing. Even for an original jurisdiction case in the Texas case that was done before the Supreme Court, it was based on a purely standing issue. And it wasn't, and it should have been heard by the court as an original jurisdiction case, which means it should have been listened to as a trial court. The Supreme Court, the case between Texas and the other swing states.
All right, you're saying there's a breach of trust in the eyes of many. And by the way, it's not just in Washington. Pennsylvania State Senate staged its own ceremonial opening session on Tuesday, the swearing in of new members. The Republican majority leader there refusing to swear in an incumbent Democrat. He'd won his race by just 69 votes. Jim Brewster's win had been certified, but Republicans cited a lawsuit against the outcome in federal court. Your reaction, Craig Kapitas, you're a Pennsylvania native, to what transpired there. Is that just a foretaste? Is it a foretaste of things to come forever now in the United States?
Yes, I'm waiting for the Fort Sumter moment to start.
What, is it going to be like the U.S. Civil War?
No, I'm waiting for that Fort Sumter moment. We just saw what was going on from your reporter out in front of the Capitol. It will happen. I don't know when, but it's certainly going in that direction. I hope it doesn't. The situation in Pennsylvania was actually quite simple. The guy was the senator from Allegheny County was verified by the Superior Court and Pennsylvania Supreme Court to take the seat.
But now it's gone to a federal judge, and that's
why. But they still should have seated him and waited to see what the federal court said. And that had happened before in Pennsylvania, by the way. And then they just say, okay.
So wait, you're saying there's going to be a lasting damage to U.S. democracy?
I think that democracy right now,
even though the Americans have elected Joe Biden, who is this middle ground candidate who's talked about reaching out to the other side of the aisle.
But show me. I don't see any more principled center-right Republicans. I see I see Republicans who think democracy is fine so long as it is a mechanism to remain in control. I see a Republican senator in Georgia, Purdue, who is running against a Jew. So what does he do? And you could look it up. He runs out ads making Ossoff's nose bigger. The only other time I ever saw that in a political campaign that I covered was when David Duke, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, tried to run for office in Louisiana. You look at this other senator from Georgia, Loeffler. This is where we're going with the Republican Party. She ran out ads that made Reverend Warnock's skin darker.
Susan Neiman, you're sitting in Berlin. You know, the United States has a 240-year-old democracy. Germans haunted by when things went awry for them. They have tons of checks and balances there. What are the lessons you're learning? And is anything irreversible or reversible when it comes to what's going on in America?
Look, when German journalists ask me questions like that, I say I'm a philosopher, not a prophet. I don't know whether it's reversible or not. I'm extremely worried. Let me tell you a couple of things that, I mean, my book, Learning from the Germans, talk. Hello? How much time do I have?
2 minutes maximum.
Okay. My book, Learning from the Germans, talks about the ways in which Germany was able to look at its own historical crimes in the face and get better for it. And that's something that we were just beginning to do in the United States, and it very much needs to be done. But what I actually wish Americans would learn from the Germans for a start would be to have a serious state-funded public media. We depend on commercial media, primarily Fox and some of the radios. I mean, majority of Americans, which is slated towards sensationalism, has very weak journalistic standards. And that is where the third of Republicans, as our Republican gentleman here said, that is where they get their news from. I don't actually watch much. I'm on television, radio here more often than I watch it. I am so happy to pay my little tax every year because I know that I'm funding a serious, thoughtful public media, and that we don't have the chance for a Fox News or some of the right-wing radio sources to really get a big following. So that would be a start, because I think until there is the possibility of shared, reliable information, the prospects for American democracy are not great.
Well, I want to thank all of you for a shared conversation and all coming together for this important discussion. Randy Yallows, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Craig Kapitas, Susan Neiman in Berlin. Stay with us. There's more coverage of that certification process as it goes forth right here on France 24.